The millionaire never believed in love, living his life for money alone, until the bull he owned saved his life. What happens next will leave you speechless. The sun was already high when the sound of hooves split the silence of the arena. Dust rose in sharp spirals, caught by the dry morning wind. Elias Grant turned at the echo of the thunderous rhythm, his polished shoes crunching on the sand. Across the wide ring, the massive form of a bull burst into view, its muscles rippling like liquid iron beneath a coat of jet black. The beast's horns glinted pale under the sunlight, curving forward with deadly precision. The crowd of locals, who had been scattered across the crumbling stone seats, shouted warnings all at once, their voices blurred into a single wave of urgency. "Get out of the ring!" one man cried, his voice cracking. "Move, senor!" another shouted, pointing frantically. But Elias stood rooted in the center of the arena, his tailored suit untouched by the dust, his posture tall and unshaken. His lips curved into a smile, not of amusement, but of certainty. He believed this was theater. A stage display meant to rattle him. The villagers didn't want him to buy their arena, and perhaps they thought a little performance might change his mind. His pale blue eyes fixed on the charging animal, and he let out a short laugh that echoed too sharply in the heavy air. "Clever," he muttered under his breath, his voice low, almost mocking. "Very clever." Yet the ground trembled beneath his feet with every strike of the bull's hooves, and no performance could fake that. The vibrations shot up through his legs, rattling his chest. He glanced to his right where his two security guards stood just inside the gate. Their expressions were not the calm, rehearsed looks of men following a plan. They were pale, their mouths open, their arms frozen by their sides. One of them whispered a curse under his breath, and the other stumbled backward, his hand reaching for the latch on the gate. Elias's smile faltered. For the first time, doubt edged into his mind. He turned back to the bull. Its eyes were locked on him, burning with a focus that no trained stunt animal could mimic. Its breath burst out in heavy snorts, and a trail of saliva swung from its jaw as it lowered its head, preparing to strike. The dust whipped harder now, clinging to Elias's suit. The voices in the stands grew frantic, sharper with real fear. "Run! Move!" a man with a weathered face bellowed, leaning so far over the railing that his hat tumbled into the ring. But Elias didn't move. Pride anchored him. He had lived his life believing he was untouchable, that money could shield him from anything, from hunger, from sickness, from loss. Even now, as the beast bore down, that belief clung to him like armor. But deep inside, beneath the polished shell of arrogance, something stirred. A memory of his father's voice, cold and commanding, whispered through him, "A man who flinches has already lost." The words had governed Elias's life. They dictated his dealings, his friendships, his very way of standing tall in every room. To run now, before the eyes of this crowd, would mean more than cowardice. It would mean breaking the code that had built him. The bull's horns glistened closer. 20 feet. 15. 10. Elias could see the flecks of foam on its mouth, could hear the ragged growl of its breath. His own heart pounded, steady and strong, but his body betrayed him with a sheen of sweat that slid down his temple. The heat of the midday sun pressed against his back like a furnace. "Senor, move!" The cry ripped from one of the locals again, desperate this time. Elias lifted his chin instead. If the beast reached him, he would face it. If he died, he would not die fleeing. And then the world seemed to break apart into fragments. The bull's hooves struck the ground with a sound like cannon fire. Dust rose in a furious wave around its body, golden against the sun. Every second stretched into eternity. Elias saw the horn angled toward his chest, saw the rippling muscles gathering power for the final strike. For the first time in his life, he understood that no amount of power, no wealth, no empire could shield him from this moment. Here, in this forgotten ring in a town he had mocked, his life balanced on a point sharper than the horns aimed at him. He wanted to shout something, to declare his defiance, but his throat locked tight. All he could do was stand, eyes unblinking, as the shadow of the bull fell over him. And in that heartbeat, Elias Grant realized he was no longer a man above the world. He was a man facing it, bare, fragile, and small. The world slowed. The dust rose. The horns lowered. He was certain he would die in that arena. The bull did not gore him. At the very last instant, the beast's muscles tensed and its hooves dug deep into the earth, sending sprays of sand into the air. The ground shook beneath Elias's shoes as the bull halted with impossible force, its horn stopping just inches from his chest. A sound like thunder cracked across the arena, but it was not from the animal. Behind Elias, the ancient wall gave way with a groan that rose into a roar, and stone blocks tumbled in a cloud of choking dust. The collapse landed exactly where Elias had been standing only seconds earlier. The crowd erupted in gasps. the voices overlapping in disbelief. Men leaned forward over the cracked stone railings, some gripping their hats, others pressing hands to their mouths. Elias staggered back a step, his face drained of color. The bull, Fiero, as the locals called him, pawed the earth once, snorting hard through flared nostrils, but made no move to strike. Instead, the animal turned its massive head toward the fallen wall, its gaze fixed as though it had seen danger long before anyone else. Elias's breath came shallow and ragged. He had not run. He had not fallen. Yet his knees trembled beneath the weight of something he could not name. He glanced to his guards at the gate. Both men stood wide-eyed, their earlier bravado shattered. Around them, the villagers began murmuring in tones that were no longer filled with warning but with awe. "He spared him," one man whispered. "The bull knew," another said, shaking his head as if the thought were too much to accept. "Fiero chose not to kill," muttered an elder with silver hair, his voice breaking. The words pressed into Elias like the weight of the sun. He snapped his gaze back to the animal. Its eyes, dark reflective pools, met his, and for a moment he felt exposed, as though the beast saw through his armor of wealth, power, and indifference. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to lift his chin. "This is nonsense," he declared loudly, though his voice wavered. He adjusted his suit jacket, brushing off the dust. The animal was startled by the wall, nothing more. But even as he said it, his heart betrayed him. He had seen the precision of that halt. He had felt the deliberate pause, the shift of Fiero's attention away from him and toward the wall. That was no accident. He should have been crushed under stone or pierced through the chest, yet here he stood, alive. The crowd did not cheer him. They stared, watching him as though he were the intruder in their sacred story. Elias forced his way toward the gate, ignoring the murmurs, ignoring the faint tremor still running through his legs. That night, back at his villa on the outskirts of town, Elias could not find peace. The walls of the estate seemed too polished, too sterile, as though mocking his restless mind. He stood before a long mirror, his reflection staring back with the same piercing blue eyes that had once silenced boardrooms. But now those eyes looked unsettled. He pressed a hand against the glass, recalling the moment when he had expected death. "I should be gone," he whispered, his voice low, almost reverent. The echo of collapsing stone filled his mind. The memory of the bull's breath, hot, alive, close enough to feel, burned against his skin. He poured himself a glass of scotch but set it down untouched. The amber liquid caught the lamplight, reminding him of the dust rising in the arena. Sleep did not come. And when dawn broke, Elias found himself walking back into town, drawn by a pull he refused to acknowledge. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. He told himself he wanted to prove to the locals that their superstition was just that, superstition. Yet his steps carried him straight to the arena. Fiero stood in his enclosure, pacing with slow, heavy strides. The bull's presence filled the space, its massive body shifting with controlled strength. Elias lingered at the edge of the pen, his fingers curling around the iron bars. For reasons he could not explain, he waited until the animal noticed him. And when Fiero lifted his head, locking eyes with him again, Elias's breath caught in his throat. Day after day, Elias returned. He stood in silence, watching the bull. Sometimes Fiero ignored him, grazing or resting in the shade. Other times, the animal would stare at him for long, unbroken minutes, its gaze heavy with something Elias could not define. Each time it happened, a strange unease stirred inside him, a sense that the balance of power he had always relied on was shifting. His assistant Darren noticed. One evening, as Elias returned from the arena, Darren followed him into the study, his arms crossed and his tone sharp. "You're wasting time," Darren said, his voice carrying the clipped edge of irritation. He was younger than Elias by nearly 20 years, but he had learned to mirror his employer's manner of speech, direct, calculating. "We have contracts to finalize, investors waiting, and you're spending hours." Elias held the gaze for a long moment, then shifted his attention to the window where the night pressed against the glass. His voice dropped, low and firm. "Maybe I'm looking for something I can't buy." The silence that followed was heavy, and Darren shook his head in disbelief. "You're losing sight of the deal," he muttered, before storming out of the room. Days later, the tension reached a breaking point. The town elders approached Elias in the square, men with deep lines on their faces and weathered hands that spoke of years of labor. Their leader, Matteo, stepped forward, his eyes stern. "You must respect what happened in the arena," Matteo said. "The bull spared you. That means something. To mock him, to mock this place, is to mock all of us." The other elders murmured in agreement, their voices steady, filled with warning rather than threat. Elias straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. Respect? I respect only what has value. This arena has none. It's a ruin. The bull is a spectacle. And soon this place will be what it should be, profitable. The elder's eyes darkened, but Elias only smirked, his voice cold. Nothing, not a beast, not a tradition, not a town, will stand in my way. Yet when he returned to the arena that evening and saw Fiyero waiting, staring at him with those unyielding eyes, Elias faltered. He felt the strength of his words slip away. The bull was no longer just an animal to him. It was something more, something Elias didn't understand. For the first time, he questioned if money was the strongest power he possessed. Elias prepared to finalize the arena's purchase. The contracts were already in place, signed with the flourish of a pen that had closed countless other deals before this one. The funds had been wired across accounts, shifting silently in the night from his empire to the town's coffers. On paper, the arena was already his, and the demolition crews waited outside the gates, their machines poised like iron predators ready to tear through stone and history alike. Yet even with everything secured, a strange heaviness pressed against Elias's chest. That night, sleep did not come easily. When it finally arrived, it carried him into a dream that felt less like fantasy and more like prophecy. He stood within the arena, but it was no longer whole. The walls lay shattered, their stones buried in dunes of dust and rubble. The moon hung enormous above, casting a silver glow over the ruins. And there, standing tall in the center, was Fiyero. The bull's eyes blazed with fire, not natural flame but something ancient, eternal. Its horns gleamed under the moonlight like weapons of judgment. Yet the bull did not lower them. It did not charge. Instead, it simply stared, silent and still, as though waiting for Elias to understand. He woke with a cry, his sheets drenched with sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He sat upright, clutching his temples, trying to shake off the image. The dream was absurd, he told himself. Just the lingering weight of his encounters with the animal. Yet deep inside, he knew it had unsettled him in a way nothing ever had. Still, when dawn broke, his resolve hardened. He would not be swayed by visions or superstition. Business moved forward, and so would he. The next day, the officials arrived to witness the transition of ownership, their documents neatly stacked, their seals ready to stamp. Elias strode into the arena grounds, his polished shoes crunching over the sand, his confidence returning with every step. He waved dismissively at the locals who had gathered at the gates, their faces drawn with worry. To him, they were clinging to illusions. Soon, the arena would be replaced with something that carried real worth. But fate did not wait. As Elias and the officials crossed the ring, a sudden clamor broke out near the pens. Shouts erupted, men scrambled, and before anyone could react, the gate burst open with a crash. Fiyero charged into the open arena, a storm of muscle and power. His roar filled the air, shaking dust from the walls. Panic rippled through the spectators. Mothers pulled their children back, men scrambled up the stone seats, and even the workers froze where they stood. Elias spun at the noise, his breath catching in his chest. His first instinct was defiance, but then his eyes found what had triggered the chaos. A young boy, no older than 10, had wandered into the arena. His small frame stood frozen in the sand, eyes wide, legs too weak with fear to move, and Fiyero's path aimed directly for him. Time collapsed into fragments. Without thinking, Elias sprinted. The world blurred around him, the shouts, the dust, the officials yelling his name. But he heard none of it. All that existed was the boy and the thunder of hooves closing in. His polished shoes slipped in the sand, his suit clung with sweat, but he ran harder than he had ever run in his life. At the last second, Elias threw himself forward. His arms wrapped around the boy's small body, and he shoved with all his strength, sending the child tumbling out of the bull's path. A roar tore through the air as Fiyero skidded to a halt, his hooves digging furrows into the earth. Dust exploded around them, stinging Elias's eyes. When the world cleared, Elias found himself standing face to face with the bull. Fiyero's massive chest heaved with heavy breaths, the heat of each exhale washing over Elias like fire. The beast's horns loomed inches from his side, its dark eyes fixed on him with a weight that rooted him to the ground. For the first time in his life, Elias did not think of contracts, or reputation, or the empire he had built. He did not think of winning or losing, or of proving his strength through arrogance. He felt only the boy's small weight that had just been in his arms, and the strange, fierce relief of having acted without calculation. In that moment, clarity struck him. Fiyero was not his enemy. The bull was a mirror, reflecting back the strength Elias had always denied, the strength of care, of sacrifice, of something he had told himself he did not need, love. The arena fell silent, the crowd too stunned to breathe. Dust drifted lazily through the air, carrying with it the memory of the chaos. Slowly, Elias lifted a trembling hand. He hesitated, his chest tight with fear, then reached out. His palm brushed the curve of Fiero's horn. The bull did not move. Instead, with a slow, deliberate motion, Fiero lowered his head, bowing as though in recognition. Gasps broke from the villagers. Some dropped to their knees, others clutched their hearts. To them, it was not just a moment, it was a revelation. The boy scrambled into his father's arms. The man, Matteo, one of the elders, held him close, tears streaming down his weathered face. He looked at Elias with a mixture of gratitude and wonder, his voice breaking as he whispered, "The bull has chosen you." Elias's breath shuddered. He could not reply. He did not fully understand what the words meant, but he felt them resonate deep within him, undeniable and true. The deal he had signed, the empire he had come to expand, none of it mattered anymore. For the first time, the emptiness that had haunted him was not filled by wealth or control, but by a connection he could never have imagined. And though Elias didn't fully understand, he felt it to be true. The announcement came without warning. One moment the townspeople were bracing for bulldozers and construction crews, and the next, Elias Grant stood on the steps of the town hall, his voice carrying across the crowded square. "The demolition is cancelled," Elias declared, his tone steady, almost defiant. "The arena will remain. The deeds belong to this town once more." The words fell like thunder, echoing through the evening air. The people exchanged startled glances. Some gasped, others whispered, but most stood frozen, too stunned to believe it. Elias Grant, the man who had once sworn to crush their heritage for profit, was now giving it back. Behind him, Darren, his longtime assistant, stiffened. His jaw tightened, and he muttered loud enough for those nearby to hear, "You're making a mistake. A fortune wasted, years of planning thrown away, for sentiment." He stepped closer, lowering his voice but keeping his eyes sharp. "You'll regret this." Elias turned his gaze on Darren, calm but unwavering. "Then regret will be mine alone. If you wish to leave, I won't stop you." Darren's face darkened, his pride stung by Elias's dismissal. For years he had been the one whispering strategies, ensuring profit was always at the center of every choice. To see Elias break free of that grip felt like betrayal. Without another word, Darren stormed down the steps, the sound of his polished shoes striking the stone like gunfire in the silence. The square remained hushed. Then, slowly, a ripple of emotion spread through the crowd. An old man raised his hand in the air, trembling as he whispered, "Gracias." A young boy echoed it louder. Soon voices overlapped, rising into cheers that shook the evening sky. Elias felt the weight of the moment press upon him, but instead of pride, he felt humility. For once, their gratitude did not inflate his ego. It softened him. That night, Elias walked alone through the narrow streets of the town. Lanterns flickered in windows, casting golden glows across worn stone walls. He passed a group of men seated outside a small tavern, their guitars humming gently. They paused as he approached, unsure of how to greet him. Elias, once the outsider who mocked their songs, stopped and listened. "Play," he said softly. The men exchanged uncertain glances, but one lifted his guitar and strummed. A haunting melody filled the air, weaving through the night. Elias closed his eyes, allowing the music to seep into him. He saw not numbers, not investments, but lives, stories that stretched beyond his own. In the days that followed, Elias shed the armor of wealth he had worn for so long. He walked the markets, not as a buyer but as a listener. He sat with farmers, learning of the soil that had carried their families for generations. He shared meals with men who had once spit at the mention of his name. Slowly, suspicion gave way to something else, acceptance. Yet not everyone welcomed the change. Some whispered that Elias was playing a trick, that he would seize control again when trust had ripened. But when the weeks passed and no bulldozers came, when Elias himself helped repaint the arena gates with his own hands, doubt began to dissolve. One afternoon he found himself standing within the arena once more, the same place where Fiero had spared his life. The bull was there, watching him from across the sand, his dark eyes steady, almost human in their weight. Elias stepped forward slowly, his polished shoes replaced by worn boots. "You could have ended me," Elias whispered, his voice carried only to the animal. "But you didn't. You gave me a chance I never gave anyone else." Fiero's breath huffed through his nostrils, his massive frame steady, his head dipping slightly as though acknowledging the man's words. Matteo appeared from the shadows of the gate, his figure outlined against the fading sunlight. He had watched Elias closely in recent weeks, weighing every action, every word. Tonight he seemed restless, as if something unspoken pressed against his chest. "There is something you must know," Matteo said, his voice low but urgent. Elias turned, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" Matteo stepped into the arena, his boots crunching against the sand. His face carried the gravity of a man who had wrestled with truth too long. Fiero's bloodline is not ordinary. His ancestor once stood in this very arena decades ago. That bull was spared not by chance, but by a man. Elias frowned, searching Mateo's eyes. And what has that to do with me? Mateo hesitated, then spoke. That man was your grandfather. The words struck like a storm, rattling Elias to his core. For years he had carried hatred for the man who raised him with iron fists and empty words, a man whose cruelty left scars no wealth could heal. To think that the same man had once spared a bull's life, had once chosen mercy over violence, it felt impossible. You're lying, Elias said sharply, though his voice trembled. Mateo shook his head. The records are there. Old journals, eyewitnesses who still remember. The blood that spared you now is tied to the blood that spared before. This is not chance, Elias. It is legacy. Elias staggered back a step, his breath uneven. Legacy. It was a word he had despised, for it reminded him of everything he wished to escape. Yet here it was, undeniable, circling back to him not through buildings or fortunes, but through flesh and spirit, through a bull who had chosen to let him live. He turned his gaze to Fiero, who stood silent in the twilight, the fading sun painting his black hide with streaks of fire. A connection pulsed in the air, deeper than ownership, deeper than survival. It was as though time itself had bent, carrying forward the mercy of his grandfather into his own redemption. Elias's throat tightened. For years he had mocked words like love, compassion, and fate, dismissing them as illusions for the weak. But standing there with the bull beside him and the truth crashing down like waves, he felt something inside break open. I never believed, he whispered, his eyes glistening. Not in family, not in kindness, not in love, but it found me anyway. The silence of the arena wrapped around him, heavy yet comforting. Fiero moved closer, his presence steady, grounding. Elias reached out, his hand trembling, and for the first time in his life he did not feel the urge to conquer, to own, to consume. He simply felt the weight of being part of something greater. As the last light of day slipped behind the hills, Elias spoke words he never thought possible. His voice cracked, but it carried truth more powerful than wealth or fear. I believe in love, not the shallow love of possessions, but the deeper love that binds me to others, to this town, to the bull that spared my life. And from that day forward, Elias Grant was no longer the man who conquered with wealth, but the man who had been conquered by the truth of the heart. Disclaimer. The story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of cynicism, unexpected connections, and the transformative power of love and loyalty. This narrative aims to highlight that some things are worth more than money, and that a person's life can be changed by a single selfless act of compassion.